Welcome to the Base Path Podcast, brought to you by New England Baseball Journal. I'm your host, Dan Guttenplan, along with Pat Donnelly, who's been on the MIAA beat all year. We're down to the final weekend. This is state championship weekend, so we're going to kind of recap the state tournament. We're going to take a look at some of our Player of the Year candidates, how they did in the state tournament so far, see who might be the leaders in the clubhouse, kind of going into that final weekend. The schedule for this weekend, Friday, looks like it's going to be the D2 and D5 state championship games at Polar Park in Worcester. And then Saturday, which maybe some rain. It wouldn't be spring in Massachusetts without a little rain in Massachusetts. But it looks like those games may go off D1, D3, and D4. So packed weekend. We're going to be covering all the games. We're going to have photographers at all the games. We're going to have that both on our website and in the print edition. So we're excited going to the final weekend of what has been an awesome state tournament. Pat, what are your biggest takeaways as you kind of reflect on the tournament so far?
Yeah, I remember, in our preview podcast, it was kind of like it kind of felt like it might be chalky a little bit, especially with our predictions in each of the four quadrants of the bracket. It hasn't really panned out that way. And D1, it's a number 8 and a number 14 squaring off, and Braintree and Chelmsford. D2, you got number 2 Reading and Walpole's, I believe, the 8th seed, maybe the 10th seed. D3, North Reading, Arlington Catholic, it's like a 9 and a number 11 seed, something like that. D4, like we were talking off air, then you get like number 2 Linfield, Millbury's a 5th seed. All right, kind of chalky. And D5 is chalk. It's a 1 versus a 2 with Pioneer Valley and English High going for a repeat. But yeah, it's been a great tournament. I mean, one of the things I talked about all year kind of in my rankings and, the weekly columns and even on here and stuff was like, it feels like it just was an anybody can beat anybody type of season, and that's sort of played out here in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll start with D1, and I really, as you reflect on it now, it's just crazy the way this one's played out. Taunton was the number 1 seed. They lost in the first round, and that was just kind of a sign of things to come. Going into yesterday's games, the semifinal games, I really thought St. John Shrewsbury was the favorite, just because they're so deep. And then it ends up being 2 public schools, Braintree as the 8 seed, like you said, Chelmsford, the 14 seed, has gotten in. And those 2 teams, I really thought were going to struggle in the semifinals with pitching, just because they both really have like aces. Braintree has Luke Joyce, Chelmsford has Matt Stewart. Didn't know if they had enough to get by those higher seeded teams. St. John Shrewsbury was the 2, King Philip was the 4. And then I was thinking today, like, is it unusual that 2 public schools face off? It's actually happened a lot more than you would think in the recent history. Taunton and Franklin faced off both in 2022 and 2023 in the state championship game. So this is actually the 3rd time in 4 seasons that it will be 2 publics in the state championship game for Division I. But as you look back to Braintree, I know they had some key injuries throughout the season. Their ace got hurt throughout the year. He's going to need Tommy John surgery. They entered the year thinking they had 2 aces. Luke Joyce is the one that's going to be pitching in the championship game. How would you kind of summarize their season? They entered this tournament as an 8 seed.
Yeah, Braintree, I felt really good about them. Like we talked about them at the start of the year, at the midseason report, even kind of going into the playoffs. And I was like, all right, well, maybe the injuries catch up here. You lose Max DeRoche, so you don't have that 1-2 punch of DeRoche and Luke Joyce. Peter Brooks had a really big hamstring injury late in the season. You're like, all right, well, you're down 2 big players. It's a tough road, especially in their part of the bracket. I think they would have, they could have faced Zavarian. That ended up being King Philip. Like there was Franklin in there, and their end of the bracket too. It would have been a tough road, no matter how the lottery balls fell, I guess. But then you come out and you see Connor Grieve, who hadn't pitched all season. Final week of the regular season, they asked him to pitch, and he's had a phenomenal tournament. He was awesome yesterday in the semifinals against King Philip. Brooks came back to DH in the playoffs, and he played the field for the first time yesterday. Had all 3 putouts in the bottom of the 7th. 2 phenomenal plays, too. He had a great catch for the second out on the run, and then the first out, it was like kind of a bloop single, kind of weird, just one that drops in between there. But then, guns the runner down at third, trying to advance to really shift the momentum there as King Philip was trying to, mount a comeback. And then Luke Joyce has, he was someone we highlighted going into the year and as the 1-2 punch there with DeRoche, and just someone who can get it done with a bat and on the mound. Big power hitter, had a pair of hits yesterday, and he's been phenomenal in this tournament, whether on the mound or at the plate. He had a shutout against Natick in the quarterfinals, and who better to get the ball in the finals than a guy who's rolling like that.
Yeah, they've almost gotten stronger as the tournament went on. They had a scare in the first round against Springfield Central. They needed 8 innings to get by that one. And fittingly, Connor Grieve had the heroics in that game with the single that scored Donnelly. But yeah, maybe they're getting healthy. Maybe they're just kind of figuring out what they need to do after those key injuries, and they've kind of regained their confidence. But they've really hit their stride here in the state tournament. I know Bill O'Connell is thrilled with the way that's been going. And like you said, they have their ace ready. He's had 2 really good years. I know his numbers are, he was like 6-1 this year with like a 1.8 ERA. They were almost even better his freshman year. So he's an ace waiting, and Chelmsford's going to have one too. How about Chelmsford's run as the number 14 seed here? What is their? I mean, they're a team that is now 18-8. So they won 18 games this year. They're in the Merrimack Valley Conference. We don't often see. I think North Andover, when they had Sebastian Keene on the team, won a state championship out of the Merrimack Valley Conference. But it's been a while since there's been a Merrimack Valley Conference team this far along in the Division I tournament. How about Chelmsford season?
Yeah, and that was one of the stronger conferences kind of all year between, Andover, North Andover, Chelmsford, Lawrence. I think, Lowell might have been in there.
Yeah. Central Catholic, I think, is in there.
But, tough road. Like, they had Shrewsbury in the first round that they grind out a 1-0 win, and Shrewsbury had beaten St. John Shrewsbury like the week before. They had some momentum. They had, of those mid-block teams, they were among the upper echelon. And then you get Bishop Feehan, the number 3 seed, who felt like they were playing their best baseball at the right time. And they made pretty light work of them, 12-3, I think it was. And then they get, against Wellesley, and I think it was the number 14 versus the number 11 there in the quarterfinals. And, Wellesley was another battle-tested team coming out of the Bay State Conference. And it felt like a coin flip, which it was. It was another 1-0 win, and Matt Stewart was awesome there. He was terrific against Wellesley. He's been coming through with clutch hits, sort of along the lines of Luke Joyce, where, bigger power bat. He can really have electric stuff on the mound. I think he's committed to Gardner Webb. So again, like who better to have the ball in a huge spot for you than the guy who's been coming through for you all tournament. And then you look at yesterday where they don't have Stewart on the mound, Finn Ramsayer gets it done, and the Matt Hall has a big hit in the semis. And so it's similar to Braintree, where they're just kind of it's all clicking at the right time.
Yeah, it's amazing. No Central or Catholic conference schools here in the finals, and they've been kind of the dominant conference in Division I over the last 2 years. We've got Chelmsford, though. I mean, this pitching matchup, I can't wait to see what happens here with Matt Stewart. Like you said, he's going to be going to Gardner Webb, but apparently, I was reading the other day, he was on the mound for their last 3 state tournament losses. He started the game. I don't know if he took the loss, but he was holding like some personal responsibility for that. So he's going to have a chance to win a state championship now as a senior. He's been as hot as anybody. Luke Joyce, you would figure, with a 2027 graduation year, he's going to be able to get recruited as early as August 1st with the way the NCAA rules work. So you would expect to see some college scouts in attendance for this one, which there always are for the Division I state championship. But who do you like in this pitching matchup? I mean, both these guys have been almost perfect in the state tournament.
Yeah, I mean, feasibly, both of these guys could go like 5, 6, 7 innings and also have a pair of hits and like RBIs at the plate. They're pretty similar in that way. Man, I've really been on Braintree all year with the, I had them pretty highly going into the season. I highlighted them again in the midseason report. I didn't really back down, and then even with the injuries, like that's scared me off a little bit. But I think I don't think I can backtrack now. I think I got to stick with Braintree after all the hype I've been giving them all year.
Yeah, they're tough. What would you say? I know you went to a lot of these Division I games this year with some of these. You saw pretty much everybody in the top 10 at some point during the season. What team is it? Obviously these are the last two remaining. Which team are you most surprised didn't make the deepest run here and make it to the state final?
I'm surprised Xaverian got bounced as early as they did. So I tried to see pretty much everybody at least once. I think the only teams I've seen twice this year are BC High, just the way the early schedule works out. Who can I see with weather and cold weather and what works out, and then St. John's.
They're the defending champs too, so you'd see them early.
And then St. John's Shrewsbury was I'd seen them the second time in the quarterfinals against St. John's Prep. So I tried to see most teams in that upper echelon at least once. So I would say St. John's Shrewsbury, after the way they played against St. John's Prep. Last year, it was the same matchup last year in the quarterfinals. It was a lot closer. And this year, St. John's Shrewsbury just kind of felt like they were on a mission. They smoked BC High. They got some revenge there. Made it look pretty easy against St. John's Prep, even though it was only 3-0. So I was surprised them and Xaverian. But King Philip had a great year, so they were in and out of the top 5 all season long. And again, another team that's just had a tough schedule and proved themselves along the way. So, but of those, I would say those two.
Yeah. Crazy state tournament. I mean, I thought going into yesterday, I was like, everybody's down to their number 2 starter because, they set it up. It's a 5-game tournament if you make it to the final. So every team kind of pitches their ace, game 1, game 3, game 5, or at least has them available, if they make that run. And I just thought St. John Shrewsbury on a day where everybody was going to be pitching to their number 2 starters was just too deep. Too many guys, swinging hot bats in the lineup, and then even, with their pitching. But, yeah, I'm surprised. But, it's been an awesome tournament. 8 versus 14. What more could you ask for in Division 1? All right, let's take a look at Division 2 now. Like you said, so yesterday, rematch of last year's state championship game with Walpole and Plymouth North. The defending state champ gets unseated. And Walpole was right in there in the state championship game last year with them, so that was a chance to avenge that loss. What has Walpole's season been like this year?
Yeah, kind of some ups and downs. We had them. I don't know if they were in our top 10 going into the year, but they were right around it, and they were in there at some point, I believe, if they weren't going into the year. But it was a rocky start. I think they started 1-3, something along those lines. And they come into the tournament. I think it was 10-8 in the regular season, but they're in the Bay State Conference and they're playing one of the toughest schedules in the state. So that bodes for something, we said, and it did. Mike, then kind of all year going into the year, we talked about they got Mike St. Martin and Andrew Burke as kind of their 1-2 punch, and maybe it didn't really translate in the regular season with the 10-8 record, but it's kind of worked out so far in the playoffs. Mike St. Martin was awesome yesterday in the semis, struck out 7 across 6 innings, 200 runs. Andrew Burke's coming off a phenomenal outing in the quarterfinals, 5 strikeouts in 7 innings, 1 run. And that was a game they needed 12 innings to win. So just a team that, is kind of we talk about the battle-tested factor going into the tournament and, coming together at the right time. And, a 12-inning win like that is pretty galvanizing for you. And then not only that, but to smoke the team that knocked you out in the final last year's, it's got to be such a lift for you going into the final.
Yeah, they put a 10 spot on Plymouth North, and we should tip our hat to Plymouth North. That's an incredible 2-year run for them. Won the state championship last year. They had our MIAA State Player of the Year in DC Brown. Earned the 1 seed again, and then just wasn't their day yesterday. But Reading here as a 2 seed, now they're 21-3 on the season. So may even you're kind of looking at Walpole like, hey, I know their record wasn't great during the regular season, but they were in the state championship game last year. They're back this year. They might be the favorite. But Reading, tough to overlook their 21 wins and the run that they've been on. What's their season been like?
Yeah, Reading kind of snuck up on us as the 2 seed in Division 2. We had a handful of their guys were in peak performers throughout the year. Ryan Marino in particular, he's had a really good year on the mound. I think he's slated to get the ball in the final. Went 5 innings, struck out 6 against Dartmouth in the quarterfinals. But their team, we talk about having to lean on your number 2 starter, and Grady Ventura has been phenomenal in this tournament. He, in there, I saw them against, I think it was Hopkinton in the round of 16, if it wasn't the round of 32. I believe it was round of 16. Really strong game. Had a perfect game going for pretty much for into the fifth inning, and still ended with 1 hit, 1 walk, and complete game there. And just followed it up with another strong game yesterday. Just when you look at the interesting thing here at play in this matchup is we talked about, like, all kind of in the preview and all this, we harp on the schedule so much, but your schedule is what it is. You make the best of your schedule, and Reading has, but Walpole sort of has the strength factor in that, in the experience from last year. But I think, like, Andrew Burke and Ryan Marino is a phenomenal matchup too.
Yeah, it's another great pitching matchup that, and you'd think Reading, like, they're right near Austin Prep, and Austin Prep's been on this incredible run over the last, 5 years or so. You'd think they'd be losing some athletes to Austin Prep. You mentioned Grady Ventura. I think his brother, Evan, ended up at Austin Prep, so I don't know if Grady will go the same route, but it's amazing the quality of baseball in Reading when, considering the public schools here in the D2 state final, and then Austin Prep has also been great over the last 3 or 4 years. Well, I guess we'll take a look at your prediction now. Who do you like in this one, Reading or Walpole? Like you mentioned, it's going to be a great pitching matchup. Yeah,
I think I may have just alluded to it. Reading, like throughout the tournament too, Liam Hansen's been a big factor, Nate Vitorisi, but Walpole, I mean, it just kind of feels like it's a team on a mission. You have that, like, I had this feeling about St. John Shrewsbury after they, blew out BC High and they made it look easy against the Prep. And clearly it didn't work out. But, Walpole, to have that sort of win against the, Plymouth North, who I think the state final last year was pretty lopsided too. So to kind of run it up on them this time around, and, we've talked about the strength of schedule so many times. Like, I think that just really bodes well for them. And Andrew Burke has the momentum, and Marino's been good too. But I'll probably lean Walpole here.
Yeah, it's that does seem like that win.
It makes for a nice story, too.
Yeah, you don't want that letdown after a huge win like that. And, it'll be nice for them if they can finish it off. But definitely not an easy task against Reading. All right, let's move on to Division 3. This is the first time in a couple of years. I think St. Mary's has been in the state final over the last, 2 seasons at least, back-to-back years. They were finalists. They are not going to be back. They were the number 1 seed. And Norwell, as the number 2 seed, didn't get there either. So what's kind of played out in Division 3? We got some lower seeds going to the final.
Yeah, Division 3. Apponequet made light work of St. Mary's there as an 8-3 final, and so all of a sudden the brackets kind of flipped on its head. But North Reading has had themselves a nice run here. They started against Medfield, who was coming off a big run in the preliminary round. So you beat Medfield, you take care of Weston, who was a factor throughout the regular season, and then Apponequet. You never know what those Cinderella type teams that dispatch the 1 seed.
Yeah.
But yeah, North Reading, they go into yesterday against Wakefield. It's kind of a close rivalry there with the towns, and 6-0 doesn't seem like it was particularly close. And you look at who's going to get the ball in the finals. Dylan Matthews, last time out, he went 5 innings, 2 earned, 7 strikeouts against Apponequet. A guy who's kind of been in their earlier matchup against Medfield, I saw he had a strong outing too. So just a guy who seems to be having his best stuff at the right time. And you look at Arlington Catholic as the number 11 seed, and there were a couple times, like, as I'm updating the bracket and like the scores on our schedule posts and stuff, and I see Arlington Catholic's matchup, and I was like, all right, this is where the run's got to end, right? And then it doesn't. They get Tewksbury. Tewksbury was like, I think they were a number 27 seed, and they were one we said to watch out for in the early going. And they make this run, and then Arlington Catholic makes light work of them, 14-3. And they took care of Medway, took care of Foxborough, who was the team with Ryan O'Leary, and coming out of the Hockenlock, where felt like a 3 versus not necessarily a 3 versus 11, but you look at Foxborough had such a great year, pretty deep. And, we don't know much about Arlington Catholic, obviously, like haven't, covered a whole lot of them this season. And, 5-3 final, and then they get to the semis, and, Sandwich is also one of those, like a more underrated team. I think they were a 7th seed. Joe Coughlin had a great season. and it took 5-4 extra innings. And, sometimes that's all you need as the 11th seed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to see North Reading there. They had that proud tradition with Frank Carey, who's a Hall of Fame coach. I won multiple state championships with him, and they've kept it going after his retirement. Who do you like in this state final? And actually, if I'm looking here, the North Reading High School ballpark is Frank Carey Park, so that would make sense after his great career. Who do you like in the North Reading versus Arlington Catholic showdown here in the final?
Man, so this is where we get into the weeds with teams we haven't seen a whole lot of this season.
Yeah.
I'd have to. I'll go with North Reading here. I don't know if it's a vibe or what, but I think Dylan Matthews, like we said, has a strong tournament, and seems like the guy you want on the mound.
Yeah. And then Division 4, what do you know about that tournament? I don't want to put you on the spot because, like you said, you've watched a lot more Division 1 and Division 2 than we have Division 4. Pittsfield, I know, was the number 1 seed, came in red hot. They have like a couple of possible D1 guys, and they got knocked down here in the semis. What do you know about these two finalists?
Yeah, Linfield, going into the year, we're putting together our, preseason watch list for the rosters and stuff. And, Tyler Adamo was a name that's, front of mind when I'm thinking about, D3, D4, D5 teams. And I don't believe he's returned. Going into the year, he was out for the season. I believe he's committed to Columbia. And so that's a big blow for Linfield, go right off the bat. And all of a sudden, here they are. It hasn't made a difference. And, the biggest thing that stands out to me is the sort of the quick strike offense we saw in the semifinals against Hamilton Wenham. Yeah. Only needed 3 innings to put up 15 runs en route to a 17-3 final. That was like Nicholas Grusis at the forefront of that, Maddox Ivanelli too. So Linfield, it's, hey, if you can bottle that again in the finals, who knows? And Millbury is an interesting one too, because I did my peak performers through the first 3 rounds, and Jimmer Donnelly was a name that was in there as just a really strong tournament on the plate, or at the plate and on the mound, and did it again yesterday. And then Cole Guilford's another one, Mason Hubley too. All 3 of them sort of at the forefront of the offense, and then Ryan Nikiforo, excuse me. Had a 2-hit shutout in a complete game effort last time out. He's probably projected to get the ball. I believe that shutout was against St. John Paul II, which was a team that was capable of putting up video game numbers throughout the season. They had a 30-0 win early on in the tournament. Logan Auer and Brian Mancinelli were just 2, just nails hitters for them throughout the season. And to shut that lineup down is really impressive. So this one's tough. Are you able to, Linfield, like we said, the quick strike offense, are you able to neutralize a big offense twice in a row? I don't know. I kind of like the momentum here for Linfield.
Yeah. Anybody who's putting up 17 runs, and that one was one of those rare games in the state tournament where they needed to check the rule book and figure out if you can get mercy ruled. They had a 10-run lead most of that game. All right, and Division 5, I'm just going to kind of give a quick synopsis of that tournament. It's going to end up being a 1 versus 2 matchup, and 2 is English High. They're the defending state champions. Number 1 is Pioneer Valley Regional. English had a great, this is a 2-year run now for them, where they're right up there in the hunt. Do you want to make a pick for that one? I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you talk about it for too long.
I was checking quickly before the show. Interesting wrinkle for English. They're probably going to be without Armanis Romero, who was ejected for, he flipped his bat. I think it was like a big RBI single he had, and it bounced into the visiting dugout.
Oh, no.
And so he got ejected. And if you're ejected, you have to sit out the next game under the MIAA rules. So you can probably assume they'll be without him unless some exception or whatnot, but I can't imagine it would be the case. But yeah, they'll be without him, but Luis Mejia has been good. Manny De Jesus is a key bat and arm for them. We don't know much about Pioneer Valley, obviously in Western Mass, but they've kind of made light work of their sort of half of the bracket as the number 1 seed. But, maybe English rallies around Romero, and, Mejia is another strong outing. So I'll give the edge to the defending champs.
Wow, I didn't realize he's one of the if not their best player. He was a great player for them last year in the D5 final. I think I covered that one, and I remember him being like And Pioneer Valley is undefeated as of right now. I think they went into the tournament 20-0, so they're probably 24-0 if they've played the 4 games like most teams have that have gotten this far in the tournament.
I believe they were the only undefeated team remaining going into the tournament because Shawsheen had a 11th hour loss in their regular season finale. So I think in the entire state, they were the only undefeated team.
Wow. All right. Well, that is a good matchup. We kind of talked ourselves into that one being a great matchup. I can't wait to see that one. All right. Now let's look at MIAA Player of the Year. I want to talk about that before we get to our 3 down segment. Obviously, we do include state tournament performance. We weigh that in the, as probably a big contributing factor to who we end up selecting. We had 14 finalists, or you picked this, Pat, because you're the one that's going to these games and watching these guys. So let's take a look at the 14, just to review. I'm just going to kind of give everybody a shout out here that's made it to the 14, just to give them their credit. And then we'll kind of talk about who has in the state tournament made their run and who might be able to come out on top here. And a lot of it's probably going to be decided this weekend. Joey Benoit at Taunton High had a great year. He hit .406 with a 1.069 OPS. He had 5 triples on the year. His team lost in the first round, so maybe not a deep enough run. Mark Garner at Leominster High School, he hit .538 with 3 home runs and 18 RBIs. Leominster, I think, fell to Braintree. Yes. I think Leominster was the 5 seed. They fell to the 4 seed Braintree. So probably not deep enough for Mark Gardner, but he had a great year. Ken Hasenfuss. Now, King Philip just fell in the semifinals, and I know Cam had a great state tournament. I wrote about it the other day when I was kind of previewing the semifinals. He, I think, got 2 wins and had a good tournament.
Yes.
So he's probably in the mix if we were to narrow it down to maybe like 5 players. Patrick Higgins at Norwell High School hit .419 with a 1.132 OPS. He also went 5-1 with a 0.20 ERA on the mound. Norwell is not in a state final, so probably tough for him to advance. Chris Chalette from Andover High School, another great year for him. He went 6-0 with a 0.60 ERA. Danny Kenny from Plymouth North, they just fell yesterday in the semifinal. He was 5-1 with a 1.24 ERA. He also hit .342. Max LaMonica from North Quincy High School was a finalist here, one of our 14 finalists. He was 4-1 with 3 for 3 in save opportunities. He had a 0.60 ERA. Milton Scott Longo was on this list, I think, probably for the second or third time. He's had a great career at Milton High School, 2-time state champion, and he will end up at Northeastern, but probably not our player of the year because Milton didn't make a deep enough run. St. Paul John II's Brian Mancinelli, you had mentioned him earlier. He had a great year along with Logan Auer. So they had they went 19-2 in the regular season. He finished with a 0.62 ERA. Paul McCarthy, we mentioned Zavarian earlier as an early out in this tournament that was surprising. He had a great year, but probably not going to be in the mix after a 6-0 record and 0.88 ERA. Braden Mercier was in a semifinal for St. John Shrewsbury. He had a great state tournament, so he's a possibility. He was 4-1 in the regular season with a 0.82 ERA. Also a big two-way contributor with a .340 batting average. Ryan O'Leary, you mentioned at Foxborough High School. He had a great year, .385, 1.014 OPS. Dylan Pratt at Shawsheen, you mentioned they fell at the very end of the regular season, but he hit .441 for that team. He had a home run for them as well as 12 extra base hits. Jack Reyes at Weymouth High School, another great year for him. He's going to end up at Holy Cross. He was 5-1 on the mound with a 0.98 ERA. And then the last of the 14 is Andrew Shute, who is going to be destined for Northeastern. He was on Bishop Fian, and that team was really impressive throughout the year. They've earned the number 3 seed, I think, in Division I. Didn't make it past the quarterfinal round, so he probably is not in the mix. A couple of guys may have done enough here in the state tournament. You mentioned English High School's Armanis Romero. He was also in consideration, so that's a big loss for them. Luke Joyce at Braintree has probably earned his way up into the final, maybe 5 players on this list. And then also Matthew Stewart, obviously, from Chelmsford High School is probably on this list. I don't know if Walpole has anybody that has emerged if you were to kind of narrow it down now, heading into the final round, pick maybe 4 or 5 guys that you think could decide it this weekend.
So I'd love to, it was kind of a project for me tomorrow and this weekend throughout the tournament of narrowing down, all right, regular season stats and playoff stats to kind of divvy some of these final few guys up. We mentioned Ryan Marino with Reading. Ethan Lebovich has been awesome too. If I had to handicap it, off the top of my head through this list, Braden Mercier is a name that's front of mind. Paul McCarthy, even though Zavarian only made it to the round of 16 or round of 8, it was. He was 9-0, even if you take into account his playoff starts. Or it might have been 10-0 actually. But just had a case to make as the best pitcher in the state in the regular season, and did his part in the playoffs, and it just so happened he didn't get a chance to go another game. Same thing for Mercier. He had a phenomenal run in the playoffs. So those are 2, at least among the non-finalists that stand out. Even Danny Kenny, I'd have to dig in a little bit on how his playoffs looked. Cam Hasenfuss too. And, Matt Stewart was someone who wasn't necessarily, in our honorable mentions, but, he's always kind of a name in the back of your head when you're thinking of Chelmsford. And Luke Joyce is an interesting one. I think he said he had like a 1.8 ERA in the regular season. So, I mean, it's a good ERA, but when you're looking at the Player of the Year finalists, and they're all sub 1.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of these guys are under 1.
Yeah, but he's really risen to the occasion in the tournament. As we know, the tournament is a pretty. It was last year's maybe the entire deciding factor in DC Brown. He had a great regular season. He was kind of in that honorable mention mix, and then just was electric in the playoffs and just otherworldly, and that really vaulted him. So, I mean, hey, all it takes is potentially Luke Joyce, like a gem from him, and maybe a big day at the plate on Saturday if that is when the D1 final will be. But yeah, I'd say any of those guys I mentioned, Mercier's kind of the one I'm going back to right now. But obviously still plenty of time for things to change as I dig in a little more, and obviously how things shake out this weekend.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to balance. Do we want to have that recency bias of like, hey, I just watched this guy win a state championship on the mound, or I like taking it into context from the regular season. I like that you got the Zavarian guys in the mix, and they had great years. And like you said, if they're not on the mound when the team takes the loss in the state championship, there's not much they can do about it.
He did his part.
Yeah.
Mercier wasn't on the mound in the loss for Shrewsbury, and
and he had a good offensive tournament too.
And it's like you said, it's tough with the recency bias because and you kind of do weigh, even if it wasn't like recency bias, you kind of probably would weigh the state tournament a little more than regular season, but you do have to look at the entire body of work, which is you got to toe the line between what we're seeing right now and what the April and May told us. So.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an awesome weekend. It's been an awesome tournament, so we're excited to cover it, and we will be bringing that to you. Like I said, with coverage on our website, we'll be, probably back for another podcast after the state championship games, and definitely keep an eye on our print edition. We always, in our summer edition, the D1 champion usually gets on the cover with a nice, celebration shot, and then we just flood it with photos from the weekend. So, if you have a player or you are a player in this final weekend, be sure to pick up our print edition because, you might have your photo in there, especially if you win. Netting Professionals is proud to be the official netting partner of the Cape Cod League and the New England Collegiate Baseball League. Netting Professionals is in the sports business of improving athletic programs one facility at a time. Netting Professionals designs, fabricates, and installs custom netting, wall padding, windscreen, batting practice equipment, and much more for high schools, colleges, commercial facilities, and stadiums throughout the United States while providing high-quality products and great service to numerous baseball programs throughout the New England area. To learn more and to speak to a Netting Professionals representative today, visit them at nettingpros.com. Remember, when it comes to netting, it's Netting Professionals. Get the pro treatment and design your very own custom Rawlings glove, just like your favorite big league stars. Choose from countless patterns, web types, lace colors, and more to showcase your unique personal style. Start with a pro design and change it up with your team colors, or build yours completely from scratch with your name, number, and state flag. Visit Rawlings.com to design your custom glove today. Now let's go to our producer, David Yaz, for our 3 Up, 3 Down segment.
3 Up, 3 Down.
Welcome once again to 3 Up, 3 Down, where I lob 3 questions the way of both of our panelists here. They're completely unprepared. They look like John Kruk walking up to the plate to face Randy Johnson right now. That's how confident they are. Dan, no love for the John Kruk reference? Come on. He's your boy,
Kruk.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
All right. Question number 1. Dan, you can start.
Okay.
As we record this in Milton, Mass., we note with interest that our Boston Red Sox have called up 2 rookies just recently, in addition to the other rookies in the lineup, Roman Anthony and Marcelo Mayer, both of whom have had kind of nice moments so far. What stands out in your memory as the best rookie season, the rookie you were most excited to root for or root against? Rookie seasons, your favorite, or however you want to take this question. Dan, your thoughts?
I always, it's probably, when these rookie pitchers, like last year it was Paul Skeens, when he came up, and these guys that were like just a few months out of college, or, they come up and they're just so dominant right away. I remember Steven Strasburg for the Washington Nationals came up and he was just lights out. Mark Pryor for the Chicago Cubs. So,
you're mentioning players who flamed out.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's tough with these pitchers, when they're on the mound throwing high leverage, games when they're 21 years old to last into their deep into their careers. But I'd say Strasburg. I mean, he was the guy that I'm from that, DC, Delaware, Philadelphia area, and I remember when he came up, that was a huge deal.
For sure. Pat, your thoughts? Favorite rookie?
Yeah, I remember just the Ohtani year being big, just because it was obviously the big name, the big unknown too. Will he work out in the MLB? So that was fun. And just as a Red Sox fan, I remember we're in those kind of dog days between 2013 and 2018, and we're hearing all about Andrew Benintendi and Mookie Betts and Rafael Devers, and I remember being really excited when they called Benintendi up, and I think at one point Dan Shaughnessy may have had Andrew Benintendi will be better than Aaron Judge.
Yeah, he did. He recently owned up to that.
He did. I saw that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember, Benintendi got called up. I don't think it was the same year. I think it was the next year Devers got called up, but sort of like those two in kind of in the similar time as each other was like, all right, now we're back. Like, this is how we go.
Yeah, and for a while it worked. Well, at least for one World Series, it worked really nicely. And as has been repeated often, who knew that we would have 0 members of that outfield remaining just a few years later. Ohtani's a good one. That reminds me that Ichiro's rookie year was phenomenal. But, I mean, both of those kind of, quote-unquote, different than your typical rookie, of course, because they're really grown men. And as far as dominant pitchers go, Dan, good answer on Skeens / Strasburg, but I mean Fernando. You guys are probably too young to remember Fernando. Dan, you might remember.
Yeah, Fernando Valenzuela.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and that was an absolute phenomenon. It's been well documented, but the sort of sordid history of Mexican Americans and Chavez Ravine, the Dodger Stadium, like basically uprooting a lot of the members of the Mexican community, and it was like the ultimate comeuppance to have a hero who was, and he was so good that rookie year. It's crazy.
I had an exchange student over from Spain in the summer of 1994. I remember because there was a World Cup that summer, and he was crazy about soccer and the World Cup. But Fernando Valenzuela spent that summer on the Phillies, and he just got super into him because I think he used to do interviews after the game in Spanish, so he used to love listening to it. And he ended up, as a gift before he went back at the end of the summer, we got him a Fernando Valenzuela jersey.
Very cool. All right. Question number 2, Pat, you can start with this one. The Padres this year are kind of treading water. They're above 500, but they're only maybe the 5th best team in the National League, despite an immense payroll. In your history of following the sport, what has been the most underachieving team you can remember and either sort of rooted for or rooted against? Pat, you take that one.
Oh, I can come up with both for rooting for and well. See, if I say the Red Sox, people are gonna get mad at me because spoiled Red Sox fan. And
this season you're talking about?
Yeah,
they're definitely underachieving.
But like, and I guess like the peaks and the valleys, there have been some deep valleys between the peaks.
That's true.
But oh man, I kind of want to poke fun and say the Yankees too, because I mean, at least in my lifetime, I was too young for like I wasn't alive in the '90s stuff in like early 2000s, and then like all they have to show for it since I've pretty much been cognizant human is 2009, I think it was, and other than that, it's like
before
all right,
that,
it's this year the Yankees year, and Brian Cashman with a war of words with like Dave Dombrowski and saying they're buying their team, they're Golden State Warriors, and then they turn around and do the same thing and they don't win anything.
Good answer. Yeah, the Yankees are kind of the definitive answer to this question. I guess it's just a matter of which edition of the Yankees you pick. Even in 2004, when of course they made it to the ALCS and of course led the Red Sox 3-0, but that team was, it's like there was no room for anybody. There was a satirical article in the Onion that said the Yankees signed every major league player, and so everyone. So they had like 300 players as a joke, but that was kind of like they got anybody they wanted, and they still. I have a friend who says Brian Cashman should have been fired years ago. He's unlimited budget, unlimited talent available to him. And you're right, just one championship this century. And it was kind of a forgettable one, too, with A-Rod and Johnny Damon.
I think an early candidate for this, if we want to look into the next decade, could be the Baltimore Orioles.
You're already saying they're up for disappointment.
Hey, we have this great new core. It's finally coming to fruition after years of futility. We lost Corbin Burns. I don't know. Here's Charlie Morton to replace him. We're not going to do anything to replace Corbin Burns, and we're going to sit on our hands and kind of flush this all down the toilet.
Yeah. Remains to be seen whether they pulled. The Astros are the team that pulled that off the most, notably. Just completely sucked for a couple of years, and it paid off. Anyway, Dan, your thoughts? Underachieving teams.
I am going to put the screws to the Red Sox here. It is the Carl Crawford, Adrian Gonzalez.
That's a good one.
That is a good one.
Yep. And I used to cover some games from that team, and Adrian Gonzalez used to just drive me crazy in the locker room. Like the quote that everybody remembers is, "It was God's will that they ended up like just collapsing in September that year." But like that's how he was after every loss. He just like, it wasn't meant to be today. Like, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, why don't you run out a ground ball once in a while? Yeah. Like, stop making excuses. Was that also? I might be combining two teams.
Yeah, it sounds
was
like
that also the chicken and beer team that was like Buck Holtz and Beckett and John Lackey like drinking beer in the clubhouse that ended up getting Francona fired, and then they had that Bobby Valentine season. Like that team was just brutal.
Well, those are a lot of different teams, and I'm not going to be able to quickly get the chicken and beer was 2011.
So that was that Francona team.
And
was that also Adrian Gonzalez
and Carl Crawford? It was okay. Well, we're going to have to go back and look this up and update it. Maybe
I might just be combining all the disappointing Red Sox teams into one.
But you're mentioning some good ones because the year we had Carl Crawford, he used to destroy the Red Sox prior to joining the Red Sox. There was one game he had like 4 stolen bases. It was like he was making us look silly. And then when we got him, I'm like, we finally got a player like that. And he sucked. I mean, he didn't suck, but he was kind of symbolic of the futility. He was underwhelming. And we were going to make the playoffs. And then that last game, we collapsed, and the Orioles, who were playing for just pride, won on a walk-off on a ball that Carl Crawford should have caught. If you go back and watch it, people, he should have caught it. It was a low-line drive. Anyway, but and if you look at it's weird. Adrian Gonzalez had a very good season statistically on the Red Sox.
He had a great career statistically.
Yeah, great. Like the next year too, before the trade.
But Shaughnessy called him like the paper stat champion, or I forget what he called him, but he was like he would always highlight the fact that he was never on a good team. He might have ended up on a Dodgers team that did well, like when he was kind of diminished later in his career, but for a while there, I don't even know if he'd been on like a team that won a playoff series.
Right. All right, final question for 3 Up, 3 Down. Dan, you can go first. Stolen bases are way up this year, and sort of have been, I guess, since the bigger bases came into play. What's your thought on how valuable is the stolen base in baseball? If you're a Billy Bean guy, you're probably saying don't steal bases because, you get, even the great ones get caught a lot. I mean, I noticed who's our center fielder for the Sox, I'm forgetting, Kristen Campbell, is 10 for 10 this year in steals. Now, that's a guy who knows when to steal a base, but not everybody does. Dan, your thoughts on general on where stolen bases fall in terms of baseball strategy and value?
Well, I think it's evolved because the bases are bigger, like you say. They're limiting the amount of pickoff attempts that you can have. The pitch clock, they're speeding things up, so you can't just play that game of cat and mouse as the pitcher to hold the runners. So I think they are trying to emphasize the importance of stolen bases. So it's become a little bit more important than it was during maybe like the McGuire, Sammy Sosa era, where it was like either hit a home run or strike out. I think they're trying to move away from that part of baseball where guys aren't putting balls in play. I think they want guys running on the bases. So it's a little bit more important than it was, but still, the cost of getting caught stealing far outweighs just taking the extra base. So I would say it's probably still a very overrated stat, but I don't know how you quantify it. It's more important than it was 5 years ago, but not wildly important, I would say.
Yeah, well, good take, because, I think as fans, and if you ever play fantasy baseball, I think you like steals more than the average person. It's just a fun stat, and if you get the right guy, you're going to get a lot of steals. But you're right, the jury's still out, I think, on whether the steal is wise long term. Pat, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I was kind of thinking about it. Sort of like in hockey when a guy beats out an icing, how it's like it's a big moment, like just to galvanize the bench and stuff. And so like a stolen base in a huge spot is feels like such a momentum shift for like Dave Roberts, like that type of moment.
Fair.
And I was also thinking about it through like the lens of this year's Red Sox team, where it is home runs and strikeouts, and nobody can do a job and put a ball in play and advance a runner or a sac fly. And how many times have we seen Connor Wong ground into a double play to end an inning? So, I mean, for a team like this, it's probably wildly important to be able to avoid those situations.
Yeah, it feels like it's working. It does more good than bad on the Sox this year, because it's just a nice feeling knowing that there are 3 or maybe even 4 players who, when they get to first, you got to worry about them. And, especially in, certain situations, if it's, 2 outs, get yourself into scoring position, Anyway, very good. As a footnote before we close out, you mentioned Dan Shaughnessy's column where he owned up to the bad Benintendi call, Benintendi versus Judge. If you read to the end of that column, my dad was mentioned. And so my dad passed away last month. And this is a happy thing, guys. So I don't want you to say sorry for your loss. I'm sure you are. But my dad was a member of the Cape Cod Baseball League Hall of Fame as an executive. He was also a member of the Dodgertown Hall of Fame, the Dodgers fantasy camp, where his first camp there, he struck out Tommy Lasorda, who responded with an expletive-laden tirade, which I can't repeat here, and they later went on to become friends. So rest in peace, Dad, Saul Yaz. And now you guys know a little bit about my dad. Here you go. And now they don't know what to say.
Well, I did mean to bring that up to you before the show.
Oh, you did?
Because I remember, every Friday, Evan and Sean and I, we look at Dan's column to find the trivia.
Oh, right,
and we'll quiz each other on the trivia questions.
And you got to read to the end to get the answer.
Yeah, and I was scrolling down, and I saw this, and Evan mentioned it too. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's Yaz's dad."
Yeah.
So I meant to mention it before the show.
Yeah. So thank you, Dan Shaughnessy. You're not the evil, cranky guy that I thought you were. You're very kind. I emailed Dan, and he emailed me right away, and included my dad. So thank you, Saul Yaz. The baseball memory lives on. And back to you, Dan, to wrap things up.
Well, thank you for sharing that memory. That's awesome. And yes, I agree. Rest in peace, Saul Yaz. And apologies to Red Sox fans. We were a little bit hard on the team today.
They need it.
Yeah, they need it. But thanks to Pat Donnelly for joining the Base Path Podcast. Enjoy the games this weekend. Rate, review, subscribe to the Base Path Podcast on your preferred platform. Thanks to our producer, David Yaz. The Base Path podcast is a Siemens Media production.